This story takes place at a time when I was relatively new to my job. The organization I work at has a public computer lab, for which I am responsible. We were about to undertake a building remodel, and the computer lab had to be moved to a new space while this occurred. Several staff workstations also had to be moved. This normally wouldn't be anything technically difficult, just a fair amount of physical labor. Unfortunately, there were constraints. The building closes to staff just 15 minutes after it closes to the public. Staff can arrive an hour before it opens to the public. The computer lab had to be fully operational in its original location at closing time the night before the move, and in place and running when we opened the next day. In short, I had an hour to get the move completely done. I did as much prep work as possible ahead of time, but that wasn't much. Move day came and I was there the minute the door was opened to staff. Computers were unplugged, moved, and plugged back in. Networking and power were run to the equipment. Cables were managed. Peripherals were attached. Everything was powered on as staff took to their stations and the public started coming in. I looked around. Everything came up as expected. Staff were able to do everything they needed. I was a sweaty, disheveled mess, but I'd pulled it off. All around the new space, people were happily checking email, playing games, scanning documents and doing whatever else they do. Then came the complaint. Someone had sent a print job, and was at the print release station trying to get their printout. We charge for printing. They had deposited their quarter in the coin acceptor, but the release station wasn't seeing the payment. I took a quick look, and didn't immediately see anything out of place. It was maybe a minute or two of troubleshooting, but they stood there, vocally expressing their disapproval of my incompetence. Rather than keep them waiting any longer, I did an override to release their print and even refunded their quarter. They thanked me for helping and left happy. Wait, no, that's not how it went. No, they took their printout, threw the quarter on the ground and said, "Keep it. I don't know why you even bothered opening today if you can't have things working," and stormed out. Ah, the rewards of hard work. If you're curious, it turned out that the print release looks for the payment device on a specific USB port. I had plugged it into the wrong port. Decades ago, I was the IT purchasing person for one of the very largest law firms in the US. We had offices across the US and in England, and a couple in Asia as well. I had to arrange for all their IT equipment. This was in the days when law firms were just starting to put a computer on everyone's desk, and everything was done on WordPerfect under DOS. So, it's a couple of days before Christmas, and I got a call from the office manager in the London office. Their laser printer needs a new toner cart, and they're out. And, they have a huge, multi-billion-dollar, acquisition deal going down, and needed to get it fixed. So, I asked who usually replaced them, and she said they had a deal with some local guy who would come and install them when needed, for some outrageous amount of money. He charged £350 for the toner cart and another 100 and change for installation, roughly $1,000, which was totally outrageous for a single toner cart. But, he had already left for his holiday. No, couldn't find anyone else, things were already shutting down, etc. No clue how to install a cart. Long story short, the only alternative was for someone to fly to London with a toner cart and install it. We tried to find someone at the NYC office, but none of the techs had a passport. Well, I decided that if that's what they wanted, I'd do it. I wasn't the tech, but I could certainly hum the tune and dance the steps. So, I grabbed a couple of toner carts. After verifying the model, I think we had LaserJet 2 and LaserJet I's in the offices, and the fastest way for me to get to London was via a BizJet, which I met at Hollywood Burbank Airport, and we flew to London, 11 hours later. So, I get picked up and delivered to the office, made a point of showing the staff how to install the cart, left them a spare, and I was done. Except, I'm stuck in London. On Christmas weekend, not just Christmas, but Boxing Day as well. And there were no flights back to the land of free. All booked up. Called the IT director, and told him I'd be delayed. He said no problem, just get a hotel and stay available for any issues that may come up. So, 3 days in the Mandarin Oriental Hotel. Room service. Had to buy some personal items, which went on the company. The flight back home? The first seat I could get was on British Airways, first class. All in all, The toner carts that I would buy for maybe $45 each cost the firm well over $150,000. Those bizjet flights aren't cheap. Considering the client paid for it, no problem. The firm billed in excess of $10 million for the work, mine, and of course the lawyers, and when I got home, I was on vacation anyway since it was between Christmas and New Year's. And #X200B. Not all tech support issues are horrible, just most of them. Smile. We have all had it happen. We are the technology janitors and should always be available to clean up all messes having to do with technology at any time of the day or night. Several years ago, about 11:30 p.m. and my mobile phone goes off, waking me from a very well-deserved slumber. Me, seeing that it is a work number. Hello, this is Op. User, hey Op, this is user down at the office and I just wanted to let you know that the main printer is out of ink. Can you come fix this? Me, okay. Is the backup printer on the other side of the department broken? User, well, no. Me, and this is an emergency because. User, well, I was told to call this number. Me, this number is my mobile phone and while I will respond to emergencies after hours, it is to be used for emergencies only. User, well, this is an emergency to me. I cannot print. Me, okay, since you are declaring an emergency I will call her manager, wake him up, let him know and be down there in about 20 minutes to change the toner cartridge out for you. User, wait, why would you call my manager? Me, because you said that this was an emergency and are requiring me to respond to this immediately. I am required to inform the manager of the department when emergencies happen. User, but. Me, cutting her off, oh, it is not such an emergency to wake your boss over, but waking me up is fine and dandy? Tell you what then, you have two other options that I have painstakingly planned for to handle just such an occasion. Either you can 1. Print to the backup printer on the other side of the department that I requested purchase of and your manager approve the cost of for this exact reason, or 2, you can look in the cabinet, labeled supplies, under the printer and find, replace the new cartridge into the printer yourself. It was placed there 4 weeks ago by me when I change out the last toner cartridge during the day during normal business hours just in case the printer needed one when I am not around. I will leave this choice to your professional expertise. Good night. Hung up the phone. I do not tell you this tale to brag, but to give you the words to use when it comes your time. So I recently left an MSP that I worked for /2 years. When I first started, I learned that we had recently picked up a client with /500 users, computers and 6 sites. None too crazy by itself, but we did not have much documentation on them. Turns out, we picked them up as a client /2 months prior, but only heard that the guy was leaving the company a week before he did. Note that he had worked there for 30 years before then. Originally, we were just going to be handling backups, avenue, patching, and granting said IT guy RMM access. Now all of a sudden we were faced with covering all their IT needs, and knew very little about their setup. Here's a brief summary of what we discovered after he left to a land of no connectivity. He did not provide us with credentials to their switches, firewalls. Turns out they're owned by the company, but managed by the ISP, who also handles their phones. We were told about 3 VM file servers, 3 terminal servers, and 2 DCs, all on one VM host, with one other VM host for redundancy. Turns out there were something like 11 physical servers, 9 DCs, 7 file servers, 12 terminal servers, and a scattering of other servers that we didn't know shit about. Something like 65-80 server instances in total. Every site had various chunks of old equipment, like ancient scanners for proprietary film, and software running on domain-joined Windows 2000 and XP machines for looking up indices of documents amongst their literal tons of physical paperwork. Faxing was handled by SPA devices living in extremely weird places, including above-ceiling tiles, in kitchen cabinets, in users' desks, and in various closets by themselves. Various users ran XP VMs with DOS emulators which accessed domain file shares, which were all SMB 1.0 with anonymous access to literally everything. Everyday user work was typically done through 3 separate apps, all of which had inter-database communication. Those 3 apps operated off 7 different servers, and tied into 2 cloud services. No explanation was given as to how they tied together. I was only able to patch together the interconnects by observing network traffic. User passwords were all 6-digit, lowercase, with 1 number at the end, and saved in an unencrypted XLS file accessible on the public SMB 1.0 file shares. Oh. And domain users was a member of domain admins. The servers I listed above did not include the /20 server 2003 instances that we shut down. The servers I listed above did not include the /40 other VMs that did seemingly nothing. The conclusion we reached there was he built a VM for every task, and if he messed it up along the way, he just built another one and left the originals running. Windows, Office, and Adobe licensing was all done through the cheapest routes possible, for example third-party Chinese websites. These license keys were stored in Word docs alongside the installers, typically on the desktop of a user's sign-in on a workstation. About a week after I started, those licenses started expiring. The business owner was not happy to hear that he'd have to buy more licenses. We were told about 2 domains. Turns out there were /15, most just weren't actively used. Several of those other domains operated on servers that ran DHCP on the same VLAN as everything else. To get around this, he simply set every user's workstation to have a static IP with static DNS. Oh, and the ISP ran DHCP at those other sites too. After consolidating data, they ended up having /10 terabytes of unique data. Before this, there was a grand total of a little over 100 terabytes living across the various servers. Apparently, in years past, he would drive between sites with a hard drive to update files between sites. Since the ISP managed the switches, they basically just handed off trunk ports to them. Some of the ports on the switches were configured as access to VLANs designated for other businesses. At one point a user's workstation got a weird IP after they moved it. Turns out he could see the neighboring business's computers. Later network scans I ran indicated that there were devices, including printers, not on-premise which could be seen. They vanished after we replaced the switches. The domain admin password was the name of the business, in all lowercase, followed by the year of its founding. Drive mappings were all done manually, often by IP. Users didn't know how to do this, he would do it in person when driving on site. Cable runs in each building were from the switches to the workstations, male to male. No wall jacks or patch panels. Many unused cables were crimped as rollover or crossover. Several server racks weren't actually secured to anything. Found that out the hard way when pushing a cable into a switch port almost knocked the whole fucking thing over. The battery backups for the servers were all long dead. He somehow got them to not beep and not turn themselves off by doing some solder work within them. There were something like 20 other, undocumented, applications that specific users only had to use once every like 2 years or so, and we only learned of those over time. Sometimes it'd be a user saying that the workstation they pulled out of a basement cabinet drawer wouldn't boot, and it'd be a Windows 95 machine running software that could only be found on floppy disks dug out of file cabinets. Other times it'd be something that used to run on servers that he'd boot up only when the users needed it. Some of those he literally kept at his house. I was put in charge of figuring out and fixing all of it. Mind you, I was new to Windows domain environments, so this amounted to taking pretty much the worst example of a network possible, reverse engineering it, reducing that picture down to what it needed to do, and improving it to modern standards, ones that I hadn't even learned yet. I was not allowed to impose downtime, even after hours. Finally, just as icing on the cake, I was also basically the main person supporting them, and across the entire company, there was only one user who could distinguish cable shapes by description, who left part way through the year. None of the users really knew what they needed on a day-to-day basis. They relied on the IT guy to do almost everything, whether it was plugging mice, keyboards in, changing the printer to print to, not the default printer, just the choice of it, or how to use the applications their job roles relied on. There wasn't a week I worked there where I didn't answer at least 2 calls from users asking how to do something in some app made just for their company. I gathered more information by periodically analyzing data pulled with GetNet connection, GetProcess, and Wireshark, than I did from talking to users. The only exceptions to this were those weird things that only got pulled out once every few years. Towards the end of my time there, the guy actually came back into town, and provided us his extended notes. He wrote them while he was on the plane to Malaysia, but didn't think to send them over on any of the days where he got internet access. Those notes covered everything that I had already found out. Needless to say, it was a point of great anxiety, and contributed to me leaving said MSP. There were other reasons for me leaving, but that one moment contributed a lot.